In 2025, a Rolex Daytona auctioned for $5.4 million. But the watch cost less than $3,000 to make. A watch sold for 1,800 times its production cost. That's like selling a paperclip for the price of a Porsche, because the clip had a crown. This isn't a watch company. It's a psychological trap. A luxury empire built on artificial scarcity, war profits, and offshore tax havens. All hidden behind a golden crown whispering from your wrist. You've made it, but the real secret, you'll never own one at retail price. And that's exactly how Rolex wants it. This is the dark, manipulated truth behind the world's most coveted status symbol, and how a German orphan turned a wristwatch into the greatest luxury heist in history. Born in 1881 Bavaria, Hans Wilsdorf lost both his parents by the time he was 12. The world was industrializing, but Wilsdorf's world had collapsed. Shipped off to boarding school by relatives who had little interest in raising him, he learned two things early: discipline, and that time waits for no one. By 19, he had escaped to Switzerland, not as a watchmaker, but as a clerk in a watch export firm. Fluent in languages, sharp with numbers, he was soon navigating the global watch trade. He didn't file patents or invent escapements, but he studied the market and understood its blind spot: wristwatches. At the time, they were considered dainty baubles, worn mostly by women. But Wilsdorf saw something else: portability, modernity, opportunity. In 1905, at just 24, he co-founded a small company in London with his brother-in-law. They didn't even make watches. They assembled Swiss parts into British casings. He named the company Wilsdorf and Davis. But Wilsdorf wanted more than accuracy. He wanted aura. He needed a name that sounded universal, luxurious, and easy to engrave. Legend says he combined random letters until one just felt right: Rolex. Short, sharp, regal. A name that sounded like it came from somewhere important. In 1910, Wilsdorf submitted one of his wristwatches for testing, an unusual act, since wristwatches were still considered novelties for women. But his gamble paid off. The watch became the first wristwatch in the world to earn a Swiss certificate of chronometric precision. By 1914, the British Kew Observatory awarded Rolex a Class A certificate, the same rating reserved for naval chronometers. Suddenly, Rolex wasn't a trinket. It was a tool. Geneva's master watchmakers scoffed into their loops as they crafted pocket watches for kings and industrialists, serious timepieces for serious men, chained to waistcoats like cigars and dueling scars. Then came Hans Wilsdorf. The German upstart pushed something outrageous: wristwatches. Delicate, jeweled things, bracelets with gears, trinkets for tea parties. To Swiss elites, strapping time to your wrist was as emasculating as wearing a skirt. But Wilsdorf saw their blindness. World War I exposed the pocket watch's fatal flaw. Checking it required two hands. In Flanders mud, reaching for your timepiece wasn't just clumsy, it was suicidal. Snipers waited for that telltale flicker into a coat. Wilsdorf struck like a general. He flooded trenches with rugged, luminous wristwatches, marketing them not as jewelry but trench watches. British officers strapped them over sleeves, synchronizing attacks without lowering rifles. The ads wrote themselves: a soldier's watch must lose neither minutes nor seconds, even in battle's storm. When peace came, the impossible happened. Soldiers kept their Rolexes like medals, transforming feminine baubles into badges of hardened masculinity. No longer trinkets, these were relics of survival, mechanical witnesses to horror. Wilsdorf didn't sell watches. He rewrote culture. By the 1920s, Wall Street brokers and Hollywood stars clamored for Rolexes, desperate for that wartime grit. Pocket watch traditionalists suddenly looked defeat. This wasn't innovation. It was psychological warfare. Rolex didn't adapt to masculinity. It stole masculinity from pocket watches and strapped it to wrists. Wilsdorf knew, culture doesn't change. You invade it, weaponize it, then sell it back at a markup. The English Channel, October 1927. Mercedes Gleitze, a 25-year-old stenographer turned endurance swimmer, was losing her battle against the cold. Her vindication swim, meant to prove her earlier channel crossing was real, was failing. After 10 grueling hours, hypothermia forced her out. No records, no France, just humiliation. Yet around her neck hung Wilsdorf's real victory, a Rolex Oyster. The watch, launched just a year earlier, wasn't actually the first waterproof design. Depalier had patented similar tech a decade prior, but Rolex held one card, a patented screw-down crown and caseback. Wilsdorf knew technology alone wouldn't conquer the market. He needed myth. Gleitze was perfect. Working class, determined, doubted. For 100 pounds, about $8,500 today, Wilsdorf bought her endorsement. Success wasn't required, just publicity. As rescuers pulled Gleitze from the water, Rolex's team sprang into action. They grabbed the watch, cracked it open before journalists, and declared it bone dry. Never mind that it hung outside her swimsuit, barely submerged, required immediate servicing. Gleitze's original note said it merely worked fairly well. A line later scrubbed from history. 3 weeks later, London's Daily Mail ran a full-page Rolex ad. The wonder watch that defies the elements. The oyster perched elegantly on a seashell. Gleitze's failure wasn't mentioned. Instead, Rolex staged aquarium displays with submerged watches, carefully edited testimonials, ads focusing solely on the watch's invincibility. Sales tripled. Gleitze faded into obscurity. As a dealer memo bragged, "We're not selling a watch, we're selling the idea of the watch." The lesson: Rolex didn't need truth, it needed plausibility. Because while facts rust, legends are waterproof. The English Channel swim was just the opening act in Rolex's century-long reality distortion field. By 1953, Wilsdorf had perfected the playbook. Find someone else's achievement, graft your logo onto it, and erase the inconvenient details. The Everest expedition was his magnum opus. In 1953, the British Everest expedition was sponsored by Smith's, a now-defunct English brand that provided the team with rugged A409 watches. Rolex, smelling opportunity, gifted 10 Oyster Perpetuals to climbers as test pieces. When Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay summit, Rolex's ad agency, J. Walter Thompson, pulled a masterstroke. They convinced the Times of London reporter to send a coded telegram the moment the summit was reached. Rolex's first watch on Everest ad ran on page 3 days before the news story even appeared on page 7. By the time Smiths placed their ad, Rolex had already hosted a victory party in Bombay, showering the team with gold Rolexes and converting Hillary and Norgay into ambassadors. The truth? Photographs prove neither man wore a Rolex to the summit. Norgay's personal Rolex was a gold Datejust, useless for climbing, while Hillary's was likely stashed in his pack. The Smiths A409? It's now in London's Science Museum, labeled worn during the climb. A carefully worded dodge. Rolex's response? Silence. The myth had already left base camp. When NASA began certifying watches for space in 1964, they tested 6 brands. Rolex failed catastrophically. The Oyster's gaskets exploded in vacuum chambers. The GMT Master's movement seized under zero-gravity lubrication tests. Omega's Speedmaster? It survived 11 torture tests, including 48 hours at -18 degrees Fahrenheit and +200 degrees Fahrenheit. Rolex's reaction was telling. They refused to participate further, fearing public failure. Yet when Apollo astronauts like Jack Swigert, Apollo 13, and Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14, wore personal GMT Masters off-duty, Rolex ads implied NASA approved. Mitchell's Pepsi GMT, the first Rolex on the moon, sold for $2.1 million in 2024, despite 0 photos of it on the lunar surface. But the real genius of Rolex isn't marketing. It's withholding. You can't buy one. Not really. Try to walk into an authorized dealer. They'll smile, nod, take your number, and vanish you into a list that doesn't exist. Meanwhile, gray market sellers have full stock at double the price. Coincidence? Try cartel logic. Rolex makes over 1 million watches a year, but pretends it's 10,000. They could flood the market tomorrow, but instead they starve it. Starve it just enough to make you beg. They're not in the watch business. They're in the hunger business. They've turned delay into desire, denial into obsession. It's luxury Stockholm syndrome. You chase the crown, they ghost you, and somehow you want it even more. And when you finally get it, you think you've won. But the game hasn't even started. Hans Wilsdorf didn't just build a watch company. He built a financial black hole, an entity so shrouded in secrecy that even Switzerland's notoriously private banks seem transparent by comparison. In 1944, grieving his wife's death, Wilsdorf established the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, a charitable trust under Swiss law with two faces. 1. Public face, funds arts, sciences, and Geneva infrastructure, like the $50 million Hans Wilsdorf Bridge. 2. Private face, a tax-exempt vault that owns Rolex outright, funnels billions into untraceable accounts, and operates with less oversight than a Cayman Islands shell company. By Swiss law, the foundation pays 0% corporate tax and discloses nothing. Not profits, not salaries, not even the names of its 8 trustees. As one Geneva politician whispered, calling it a charity is like calling the Vatican a neighborhood church. Rolex generates $13+ billion annually, 2025 estimates, but the trail ends there. Here's what we do know. Real estate empire. Rolex owns entire city blocks in Geneva, including a $1 billion factory in Buhl and the 2023 purchase of retailer Bucherer for $2 billion. Charitable spending. The foundation claims to donate $300 million yearly, but 90% stays in Geneva, funding everything from hockey teams to women's shelters, conveniently keeping local officials loyal. The missing billions. Analysts estimate Rolex's cash reserves could run the company for a decade without selling a single watch. Yet ask how much CEO Jean-Frédéric Dufour earns, or why Tudor, Rolex's affordable sister brand, shares the same tax loophole. Silence. As one insider noted, the only transparency at Rolex is the sapphire crystal on a submariner. Rolex's brilliance isn't in watches, it's in legal alchemy. By masquerading as a charity, it 1. Eradicates taxes. 2. Controls Geneva. The foundation's donations make it the shadow government of Geneva, funding 30% of local cultural projects. 3. Immunizes itself. No shareholders equals no protests. Just a perpetual money engine wrapped in Swiss neutrality. Even death couldn't crack Wilsdorf's system. When he died in 1960, he executed the ultimate power move. He bequeathed 100% of Rolex to a shadowy charitable foundation bearing his name. Not to heirs, not to shareholders, to a legal entity designed to swallow profits, deflect scrutiny, and outlive empires. His foundation's bylaws mandate that Rolex must never go public, never be sold, and never reveal its finances. The result? A non-profit with more power than most nations, and a CEO who answers to ghosts. And what about the past? That's sealed too. During World War II, Switzerland famously maintained its neutrality. But neutrality didn't mean morality. Behind the snow-dusted Alps and diplomatic smiles, Swiss banks quietly became conduits for Nazi wealth. Gold smuggled from occupied territories, art stripped from Jewish families, fortunes laundered under the pretense of privacy. Dozens of institutions have since been linked to these hidden transactions. But Rolex, their role remains a mystery. Their archives are locked. Their wartime records are inaccessible. Their internal communications sealed for eternity. There is no definitive proof that Rolex collaborated, profited, or facilitated wartime business with Axis-aligned clients. But there's no exonerating evidence either. No audits, no releases, no transparency. It's a silence that feels strategic, a vacuum where history should be. And in that silence, whispers grow. Because when a company obsessed with time refuses to account for its own, questions become unavoidable. How did Rolex maintain its supply chains during wartime scarcity? How did it preserve its luxury branding while Europe burned? Why are its financial and export records from the 1930s and 1940s still locked behind legal walls? We may never know, because unlike governments or public companies, Rolex isn't obligated to reveal anything. Not to journalists, not to historians, not even to shareholders. It exists in a jurisdiction of shadows, sheltered by Swiss charity laws, protected by decades of prestige, and insulated by a global reputation too valuable to interrogate. And in the present, Rolex watches don't just show up in luxury magazines. They show up in crime reports. Drug cartels don't wire money. They move Daytonas. Oligarchs don't carry briefcases. They wear submariners. In black markets, Rolex is currency. A submariner is easier to smuggle than a suitcase of euros. And Rolex? Silent. Always silent. Because silence is profit. Meanwhile, the watches themselves haven't evolved in decades. Omega landed on the moon. Rolex? They changed the bezel color. One year it's forest green. The next? Evergreen. Same movement. Same steel. Different hype. Different resale price. It's not horology. It's seasonal fashion. It's Pokemon for rich men. A steel bracelet with a psychological payload. And you wear it proudly, not knowing you're wearing the bait. Because that crown on your wrist is not a symbol of success. It's a trophy you were tricked into chasing. Every Rolex is a mirror, reflecting what you want the world to think of you. Powerful, wealthy, chosen. But the truth is simpler. You're just a cog in Wilsdorf's century-old dream. The scarcity? Engineered. The price? Inflated. The loyalty? Manufactured. The prestige? Weaponized. You didn't beat the system. You became part of it. And that's the final twist. Rolex doesn't sell watches. It sells status addiction. It doesn't keep time. It distorts it. Every second you wait for allocation, every hour you spend refreshing forums and grayscale sites, you're not chasing a watch. You're chasing meaning. And Rolex has convinced you it comes in 904L steel. So next time you see that crown on someone's wrist, don't ask what time it is. Ask how long they waited to feel worthy. Ask how much they spent trying to belong. Because the watch doesn't tell time. It tells you a story. One written by Hans Wilsdorf. One designed to never end. If this made you rethink Rolex, imagine what else they've sold you. Status, scarcity, success. This was just one story. There are hundreds more. So if you're ready to pull back the curtain on the world's most powerful illusions, hit that subscribe button. Because the next empire we expose might be the one on your wrist, your wall, or your wallet.